My name is Mark Lay. I'm the president of ECHO, and it's my great pleasure really to introduce Steve today, who will be talking to about the topic of the day, which is designated substances. So I guess I just wanted to take a couple seconds to thank everybody for attending this webinar today. We live in some pretty weird times right now with COVID going on, and we have found that this is a really great way to, be productive and continue to reach out, talk to our clients, talk to those who have interest in the services that we provide, and it's just kind of a service that we're providing. It's free. You get to sit in on and get some information about something that might be of interest or of need to you. And today's topic is about designated substances. Of course, we've been doing, as I'm sure many of you attending today are aware of, we've been providing a variety of topics through this kind of a forum. And it's just, we find that it's a really great way to share information and get feedback from you and from the needs that you might have. And if you have some interest and some specific topics that you'd like to see us address more, I would encourage you to send us some of those topics, and we will endeavor to provide more of such sort of information moving forward. Of course, when we're talking about these types of issues about environmental and issues and hazardous materials in buildings and so on, it's certainly not the intention that you attend a seminar like this and walk away an expert. That's not going to happen in 1 hour. But perhaps as you listen to Steve, who will be presenting this today and who has a lot of experience and has been with ECHO now for over 8 years and for years before that in this industry. So Steve brings a tremendous amount of, hands-on experience dealing with this very topic. And so I'm very proud and happy to introduce him to you today. And as you listen to him, I guess, my advice to you, for what it's worth, is just think about, how some of these things might apply to you and your workplace, and ask yourself the question as, do I have some of these issues? And, what can I do about making sure that I'm being proactive and not sort of having to react to not having addressed these issues in advance? So things like designated substances really is about being proactive, including an allowance for recognizing these things in your buildings prior to projects. And it's required. It's a requirement by law. So it's one of these things that, you just need to do it. And what's the best way to do it to make sure that you spend as little money, because being proactive about this will save you money. And I think that's kind of the overall message I just wanted to provide today, is just think about it as you're going through this. Hey, do I have this issue in my buildings? And if so, then, we're here for you, and you can reach out, and we are very happy to help in any way that we can. So Steve, thanks for doing this today. Steve is one of our, he's been great at sort of stepping up and helping us present various topics during these COVID times. And I'm really excited, and I know he's going to do a great job presenting this topic to you today. And I encourage everybody on the line to just ask questions. This is a great time for you to try and, be a sponge, but also get any information that you might need. And if we can't get to your question today, then, please follow up. We would love to hear from you. So with that, I will turn things over to Steve. Who knows, what I'm going to say the next time. Today I was planning to tell you a little bit about ECHO, which I haven't really done, but I think, you guys know us. I think most people on here know who we are. So really, Steve, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks, Janelle. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's funny with the dynamics of kind of where we are, and I'm very much more accustomed to kind of being in front of people in a room doing training than I am in front of a screen. But The benefits here are we get many people, you know, to be able to kind of log in and join on these webinars. So that's great too. And today's topic is designated substances. So the word designated is really kind of unique to Ontario specifically. And this is, you know, hazardous substances are, you know, throughout Canada, you know, as far as what we're looking for, pre-construction, pre-renovation, pre-demolition. And there's a bit, so the agenda today is fairly loose in a lot of ways too. I like kind of slides of, and just being able to kind of talk about things as opposed to running down things word for word. There are a few slides that are kind of word for word, you know, so first off is a brief review of designated substances in Ontario. Some of the guidelines we'll talk about. There's an ECO guideline that just was released recently. So I'm going to throw that in there a little bit. The key guidelines for testing, abatement, the acts, the regulations, kind of the technical mumbo jumbo as well. And then what is the potential impact for the property owners, project owners, managers, building occupants, and contractors, and really mitigating those impacts. So it's kind of that proactive versus reactive kind of approach that we see quite commonly with consulting on DSS. Common questions. So this is something that we kind of want to just throw out the most common questions that we receive when it comes to DSSs. So we'll kind of provide a couple of case studies, things that, you know, how ECO handled the project, the flow of those projects. So we use two case studies. One will be a pre-renovation and the other one will be a pre-demo. And then of course, yeah, evaluating, controlling these substances. So it's kind of a loose agenda here a little bit, 3 items. Really, what are designated substances? So as always with every webinar that I've ever attended, I've always noticed there's a wide range of expertise. There's folks that have no idea what the webinar really kind of is, and there's experts that also attend, and probably the same applies here. Designated substances are defined as chemical, physical, or biological agents designated by Ministry of Labor, that's the acronym MOL, to be of importance in protecting the health of Ontario workers. So the key here, the 2 takeaways is designated, that's unique to Ontario. There's a list of designated substances that we'll provide and we'll go through. And really it's about workers. It's about kind of notifying workers and protecting their health before the work really starts, during the work, ensuring that workers are made aware of the hazards in their workplace. So this is the Ontario Regulation 49009. This is the regulation that we're talking about for designated substances. And this is the ECO guideline that I had mentioned previously here. And I'll read this out. A DSS guideline provides a framework to improve worker safety in the general construction, abatement, and demolition sectors before work starts, and provides information and procedures based on current legislation, the state of sciences, industry best practices, and practical experience. So this is like a guideline that I found very helpful. I've kind of gone through it myself, and it's one of those guidelines that ECO does very well that kind of simplifies a topic. You know, they have guidelines on industrial hygiene, or sorry, on you know, worker hygiene, for example, lead guidelines, mold guidelines, and now here we have a DSS guideline as well. So that's something you can download and have a look at for some extra resources. And of course, Ontario Regulation 49009. What are DSS? What are designated substances? Well, here they are. So in Ontario, they're defined as these 11 designated substances. Now, the underlines that you're seeing here, asbestos, lead, mercury, silica, these are the most common you know, hazardous substances that may be in a building or in a facility. It's not to say the others won't be there, but the most common from an inspection and sampling perspective is definitely these 4 that you're seeing highlighted and not really highlighted, but underlined. And so, you know, it's asbestos and lead and mercury and silica. These are the common DSSs, designated substances. And, you know, so, you know, why do we need to do a DSS survey? And so really this is about like due diligence, right? Like I think we all pretty much are aware at this point in 2021. Certainly there's been an evolution over the years with the education of why DSS is required, designated substance survey. Why is it required? It's the law. It's under the Occupational Health and Safety Act that places a duty on building owners, project owners to identify the presence of designated substances prior to demolition or renovation work. So really what we're seeing, really in the industry is gone are the days of I didn't know. I think that those days are kind of past us. I think now we're getting more into inspectors, so Ministry of Labor inspectors that are, and workers, tenants, owners, building staff, our own staff, that are being, more aware of these hazardous materials that could be present in their work areas. So really kind of when I say gone are the days of I didn't know, we've kind of evolved into this, where's your DSS survey mindset, which is good. That's the proactive approach that we're kind of aiming for, versus the reactive approach, which is, well, what's a DSS? So it still happens, but we do tend to, we're very much more proactive in budgeting for the environmental side of doing a DSS. A typical DSS consists of an extensive examination of all accessible areas to identify suspected designated substances. So that includes, visual inspection and also bulk sampling, of course. The identification of suspect materials is based on the surveyor's knowledge regarding the historical use of such materials in buildings. This is a competent person, which we'll talk about in another slide. Samples are required for laboratory analysis to confirm the presence of or absence of asbestos. So that's really the most common bulk sampling that would be performed during a DSS, is representative, samples of floors, walls, ceiling, mechanical fittings, piping, et cetera, et cetera. It really depends on your scope of work for construction. The more information we have, the locations, what's being disturbed, we can really target that. Your consultant can really target that sampling per that scope of work, whether it's pre-renovation or pre-demolition. So there are other things we can sample, of course, which is, lead in paint. You'll see that, especially paint. So you'll see most of the time in most DSS reports, you'll have some representative paint samples. They're looking for, mercury thermostats, things like that, benzene in tanks as a component of gasoline, for another example. Not to go too technical with every single material and where it might be. I think this is a good example of the representative sampling and inspection to kind of determine the location and quantities of DSSs that may be present within that project specific work area. So that is what a designated substance survey really is. Could have drawings. It could have a room by room appendix, for example. Why do I need to know this little kind of cartoon here? It's the facilities people tell me there's asbestos in the ceiling. They say you don't need to worry about it unless it gets disturbed. And of course, they plan to disturb it today. So obviously the requirement here is really by the MOL. They'll put a stop work order, if you don't have a survey, if they come to site. And, majority of times it's been my experience that when the MOL is really on your site, they're there for other reasons. And then as they're there, they're kind of, walking around and looking for things. It's not uncommon to have one of our construction projects, the MOL inspector's there for a completely different reason. And they ask, hey, what are you doing here? They'll ask the construction personnel, what are you doing here? They say, we're doing, soffit upgrade. And they say, okay, where's your DSS report? And hopefully, if that goes involved, they just say, here's the report. And then that MOL inspector looks at it and says, okay, it looks project specific. It looks pretty up to date. Looks like they've done some representative sampling here. Carry on, right? So I think that's the perfect, that's the goal, is to kind of have those scenarios where we don't have a stoppage in work and we can kind of just continue with our scope, which is renovation and or in other cases demolition. And of course, you got the money bag there. That's the result of less stoppage, and other things too. And I'll kind of go off on a tangent a little bit too, which is our brand. And I say our brand in the sense that we're partners. So your success on your projects is really our success in a lot of ways too, but it's your brand, and making sure that folks who think about your brand know that you're doing the right thing, and you're kind of cognizant of what's the plan to protect workers and do this survey really to budget for it and just and take care of it. Your brand is important, so that when people are thinking about your brand, they're saying, yeah, that's a company that is doing the right thing, versus I didn't know, stop work orders. You kind of get a name, unfortunately, in some markets as well. When you apply for a permit, they kind of red flag you or your organization, which is, can cause additional inspections, things like that. So we've seen that. I've seen that in the past as well. The duties, this is the Health and Safety Act, the duties. So more of the technical side of why do we do a DSS? Well, we have the reasonable precautions to protect workers. So there's the clause there. Equipment, materials, and PPE in good condition. Information, instruction, and supervision. Determine presence of a designated substance to inform contractors before reno or demo. Section 30. And so these are just the duties of, over and above brand protection or doing the right thing or due diligence. These are just, this is the law with doing a DSS, pre-reno, pre-demo. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, I haven't been doing DSSs. What's up with this thing? I don't know. I've never heard of this before. And I think, so what are the consequences for not knowing? And here they are. Well, this is kind of a repeat: chemical, physical, biological agents. So we know the MOL will be involved. At some point, you might get away with a project where nothing happens. Everything's kind of going smooth and fine. But there are fines for not knowing, addressing in advance of disturbance. So, we use examples of it happens. It still happens. I've worked on projects frequently where there's, disturbance to an ACM, for example, and we're kind of coming in after the fact. We're doing air sampling and inspection and kind of cleanup. So those are kind of unfortunate scenarios. It's not always perfect, but there are scenarios where there's like a pre-renovation project where somebody unknowingly, disturbs something. So we kind of want to, again, the cost, it's a cost factor and the time factor here, protecting workers as well. So we want to avoid costly project delays and extra costs post-tender. And also those kind of cleanup projects as an example. And of course, protecting workers. So we kind of identify these hazards before the work starts. We either abate, if it's in good condition, we can leave it in place. But as long as those workers are aware that, I'll use this as an example where, a multi-res building may have, like a texture finish ceiling in the corridors, and the project involves flooring. So we want to, replace the flooring. Well, part of that would be notifying to the workers that the ceiling is asbestos and don't disturb it, but the actual scope of work wouldn't involve disturbance to that ceiling. So there could be another contractor that comes in and does a lighting upgrade. And in that case, likely there's going to be some interaction with that ceiling material. So in that case, there could be possible local abatement at those light fixtures. So there's kind of a two different scenario there of kind of protecting those workers. Yeah, we're doing corridor renovation work, but there's two separate, distinct interactions with building material. One is just a flooring contractor who has no interaction with the ceiling whatsoever. And the other contractor is doing a lighting upgrade, which is directly working at, adjacent, near, with the ceiling texture finish. So we want to protect all those workers, or at least notify them that these materials are asbestos containing, in conjunction to that scope of work, construction scope. So this is a common question. I have an asbestos survey report. Isn't that the same thing? don't want to discard asbestos survey reports. As always, any kind of information that we have historically through environmental reports can come in handy, can save you money, your organization money, in the sense that, if you have an asbestos survey report, the consultant can look at that report and say, oh, look at that, plaster was representatively sampled. There was, X amount of samples collected within the facility. It's all negative. Maybe for the purpose of our proposal, we can say, yeah, we probably maybe don't need to sample plaster, or we're just taking a few representative samples of that plaster to confirm that it's not an issue, not asbestos. So these asbestos survey reports, they're not intended for construction activities, though, right? So we want to make sure that while we have this information, it could be useful to a project, construction project. It's not really there to replace a DSS. So if you give that asbestos survey report to the Ministry of Labor, they're going to look at that and say, this isn't a DSS. I don't want to look at this thing. There is a component. It's the most predominant, probably cost-wise, which would be asbestos abatement. It is useful to some degree, but it's not intended for construction purposes. It's intended for ongoing management of ACMs in buildings, floods, fires, property management folks, maintenance folks. Hey, I've got a question about this material. Has it been sampled? We probably even want to resample it. To be honest, there's that's kind of the idea here is with the asbestos survey reports is they're very limited in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, they're just taking the minimum number of samples, and that would be regulation 27805. They're just taking the minimum number of samples to kind of get a compliance kind of report, not intended for construction related activities. And of course, it's just dealing with asbestos. So there's the other 10 potential designated substances which may be present within that project specific work area or work areas. So while we're happy to kind of get information as consultants and saying, hey, ECHO, we need your quote for DSS. We're doing office renovation work. We have some reports for you to here's some information for you. Great, we'll take it. There are other instances where we'll get like 15 historical reports. And of course, there's always a time perspective of reviewing those reports versus just, kind of getting getting some information on where the project is or where the construction is happening, and then just going in there and doing representative sampling specific to that DSS. There's kind of like a cost benefit analysis there between reviewing 15 reports, which gets us to maybe we should kind of take some bulk samples within this project specific DSS. So is that kind of, we like the historical stuff. We might even reference it with the DSS. So we might reference these historical reports, but at the end of the day, we're probably going to be taking some representative bulk samples within that project specific work area regardless. Hopefully that makes sense there. But yeah, ACM survey reports, we see that quite often, which is, hey, I've already done my survey. Here it is. No. And this is another good question, which is, there was an old DSS report for the building. Can I just use that report? So think of it as back in the day, 2006, there's a report in your database that was for, I don't know, a parking garage renovation project, balcony renewal project, and it's dated 2006. And you kind of dig that up and say, well, we're kind of doing this thing where there's kind of like balconies involved. Can I just use that report? Well, it's not recommended. Designated substance surveys are prepared specifically related to the planned construction renovation. So old reports may not include, different project-specific areas of concern. Site conditions change. That's a good point. Renovations occur over the years as well. The designated substance survey needs to be an accurate reflection of current site conditions. So as the education kind of rises, the bar rises, and I think the MOL inspectors are also aware of looking at a report and looking at the date. One thing they're really looking for, that from our experiences, they're looking for to see if it's project specific, and by a date. So 2006, they may look at that and say this is not current. Update the report or update the sampling or whatever. There is another aspect to this, though. ECHO, we have lots of pretty common sense folks, in that there are instances where you can have an existing DSS report and just kind of add on to it, right? So there's in that case, you can say, our organization has a budget to do corridor renovations. Great. We do a DSS for corridor renovations, and then the organization says, hey, you know what? We have an extra budget to do stairwell renewal. Great. And then we tack on that stairwell to the existing DSS. The one thing that we want to be cautious of is adding on 15 projects to a DSS report. Folks looking at that report might look at that and say, it's not specific to the work. And what I mean by that is you could have the corridor renovation worker doing their work. And then there's maybe stairwells isn't the best example, but let's say it's like a roof replacement project. So now the Ministry of Labor is on site looking just at the roof issue, whatever the issue is for the roof, let's say. They get this report and it says corridor renewal. And they're kind of like, what's up with that? I see the roof there, but what's with the corridor thing? It can kind of get complicated. And I guess every inspector is different. Their interpretation of these reports is dependent upon that inspector. But really, we kind of want to, the goal, is to have a report for a project. I would say that we can work with organizations to kind of tack on work within a DSS. That can be done. We just want to make sure that we're really kind of being specific to the scope for these projects. And at some point, maybe we just want to say, hey, you know what, let's issue a separate report for that roof thing. And let's issue a separate report for that corridor thing so that we can kind of navigate any stoppages or questions that folks might have. Who should do the assessment? The Act requires that a competent person complete the assessment. So I'm always really, that's when I laugh all the time sometimes when I get on with clients, and that, I'm a talker a little bit. I like to kind of explain things and, educate. And I realize that this is, not everybody likes that. Not everybody wants to, have a phone conversation talking about the number of samples. And while I kind of geek out on that kind of stuff because it's what I do and I really enjoy it, I find that some clients are kind of like, yeah, I already have to do what I'm hired to do, which is this and this and this and this and this and this and this. I don't, there are always other clients that do enjoy learning about stuff like this. And why is that? And what about this? And what if I did that? And if I change this scope of work, would I get a better price doing that thing? Competent person is really kind of one of those magical terms that I would love to talk to clients and really kind of get those dollar amounts down on a project, right? I think when a client says, yeah, okay, you're telling me that the texture finish is asbestos. Well, what if I don't touch the texture finish? And I say, you know what? Yeah, okay. So that they're not taking the texture finish, then no abatement required. And everybody kind of, yay. So I think there's instances there where the competent person is really somebody who is kind of understanding from the survey perspective. So the technical, taking samples and assessing the work area. But I think the competent person aspect really comes into play on a project where we can talk about scopes and we can talk about revisions and cost savings and, making scopes malleable in a sense where we don't need to disturb something. Well, let's not disturb it because it's probably the most cost-effective option. And of course, if we have to, we'll work through that abatement process there as well. The report identifies DSSs. Now, what do I do? I guess that's the question here is, the report identifies designated substances on my project. Now what? So we don't throw up our hands and say, I don't know, it's it. We're going to shut it down. Well, we can work through it. It's not the end of the world. That's really kind of when I kick into gear for the most part, or consultant in general. If those materials do not impact the construction scope and the health and safety workers, it doesn't impact the health and safety of any workers, then it's likely no abatement is needed. So I think the biggest thing with any kind of doing a DSS, it's like that the biggest fear is, it's going to hold things up and I've got to do abatement work and it's going to, sometimes it's, there's going to be like a type 2 enclosure and, it's part of the scope of window replacements, for example. If there's texture finish, for example, that's asbestos. There's not really much getting around that in some ways. But there are other ways where, flooring comes back as asbestos. Well, can we not go on top of it and not disturb the flooring? Sure. There's good examples there where we could have a report that says you have asbestos or lead. Lead paint's a good example, or, but it won't require really any action per your scope. So fear not. In other cases, fear. I don't know, there's a budget there that hopefully we can kind of provide, which is the next point here. Doing a DSS is great, but a good consultant can also provide a budget estimate for abatement. So it's one of those, here's a DSS per your scope of work. The abatement budget estimate is X amount, or proceed to be X amount, sort of thing. So you can kind of get an idea. We can obviously do formal quotes as well, work with contractors to get formal quotes. If abatement is needed, the consultant can provide an abatement specifications document. So this can be both formal or informal, describing the methodology of abatement and quantities and types and things like that. So this document is intended for the bidding, for the tender process, really. Bidding contractors of what materials, quantities, and types of removals are needed for the purpose of the bid and tender process. So they're aware of kind of what it is that they need to include in their cost to do the renovation work. Usually it's a GC, a general contractor, or whatnot. If that abatement falls through their project, they need to know that so they can put a price on it, or have one of their subcontractors put a price on it and whatnot. So hopefully that makes sense from the technical project side of life for a lot of project managers and asset teams out there. Who can remove designated substances? Well, the example we're using here is asbestos, the most common. Removal of friable asbestos requires licensed abatement workers who have been trained. Removal of non-friable asbestos and other designated substances can be completed by non-licensed contractors, which is surprising to most, but industry standard is to use qualified specialized environmental abatement contractors. Okay, and typically they're all qualified, licensed to be interacting with both. If you need a contractor as well, there's always the ECOH website has a list of qualified contractors there as well, or you can reach out to ECHO for assistance there as well. So these are the case studies, 1 and 2. The most common for DSSs is number 1 is a pre-construction or pre-renovation. The other one is a pre-demolition, and there's differences between the two in the sense of intrusiveness, getting into every nook and cranny, so to speak. The whole building is being demolished. There's a different approach, a little bit more complex than it is with just, say, an office or one room or whatnot for a pre-renovation, pre-construction. So I want to kind of relate this into something that I've experienced over the years, which is the desire to renovate. Case study 1, I put in here for multi-res. I do a lot of multi-res consulting myself specifically. And this one is a balcony renewal project for a client. And it was an amazing project. It happened a few years ago. And, they really kind of took the entire facing of that building and they demolished it. So when I say demolished, they removed all of the balconies, all the concrete, all the railings, that was all removed, and they were going to refurbish, and it's not refurbish, they were going to make new. So they're going to put in new balconies and new railings. And the balconies had a texture finish. So it's like an exterior friable texture finish on the exterior of the balconies. And of course it was summertime, and people, we wanted to be mindful of air conditioning units some of the air conditioning units were installed as a window air conditioning unit. It was a kind of a complex project in a sense where kind of interior control. So there was like some interior controls we had to take for folks not opening their balcony doors and not having any balcony. That was more of a health and safety aspect of the project, almost like a lockout tagout, if that makes any sense. But we bypassed a lot of the HVAC systems as well. But doing a full out abatement on a giant mass lift climber, it was called. So it was like a lift climber, that not a scaffold, but a lift climber that was mounted to the side of the building. And it, the abatement contractors would get on that lift and they would do the abatement work on the side of the building with this mass lift climber. And that's kind of an extreme, almost like a demolition project when you're talking about removing balconies. Most cases you'll have, some local scraping, and in most buildings they'll have no asbestos on the balcony. It's a kind of a rare scenario where you have a texture finish on the exterior of a building. It can happen, but this one, going back to the slide here, going off on a little bit of a tangent a little bit, but budgeting here was, we did the DSS, we provided the report. This required formal abatement specifications. It was a large capital project. So we did a formal abatement specifications document that the client included in their tender package to the contractors for bidding on the project. So they're aware of friable texture finish on the side of the building, on the balconies. I believe there was lead paint on the railings as well too, but we dealt with that in the type 2 enclosures. And so what that meant was we completed the abatement work, which allowed the clean operation, which was happening afterwards. The new balconies were installed. So that was the case study for the multi-res balcony renewal project. There's other examples, of course. The most common, window replacement happens. We have mechanical upgrades all the time. A lot of our buildings, our facilities are aging, so they're requiring these upgrades constantly. Piping, mechanical systems, architectural, walls, ceilings, floors, roofing replacements. These are all very common for DSS, of course, as well. Exciting stuff. And then we have this as a demolition, where this happened in my early days, early 2000s, I want to say, if I remember correctly. But it was a demolition of the public transit station in it was a GO transit station in Etobicoke. So that was the Mimico GO transit station, and they demolished 250,000 square feet of their facility. Quite an extensive project in a sense, where here we're talking about demolition. So we had to get into really every nook and cranny, which was taking a sledgehammer to concrete block wall, as an example, looking for vermiculite. Vermiculite is a loose fill insulation that could be present within wall cavities. So that was a good example of, we wouldn't normally take a sledgehammer to building materials when we're doing a pre-renovation survey. So there's an intrusive concept or mindset that we take on when we're demolishing a building, which is everything's going to go. We want to make sure that we're checking really everything. So there's more of an intrusive and more of a representative sampling approach to ensuring that we've checked everything, so to speak. So that is part of the budgeting. So when you're thinking demolition, think about a little bit more time, a little bit more sampling, making sure that the consultant can kind of do what they need to do to issue a report that satisfies what's present, as opposed to a more of a project-specific renovation project, which might only deal with 3 or 4 rooms. And yeah, the building is historically known to have ACM, but it's just in the mechanical room. It's not in our work area. And when you're doing a demolition project, of course, it's the all-encompassing aspect of it. Abatement specifications, of course, we provided those. And really, we saw the best part of this project was long-term. It was over a couple of years, a lot of site walkthroughs, a lot of, kind of navigating the health and safety aspect of things as well, some of the site conditions. But the abatement part of it was quite complex as well. A lot of pipe insulation, and there was vermiculite in the walls as well. We did some type 3 abatement work there as well. And that's really one of the bigger projects that I've worked on as far as like a mass demolition of a building that had quite a lot of asbestos in it. I've done lots of projects in the past where there's been demolition occurring, but not really a lot happening as far as abatement work is concerned. This one was one that had really a lot of asbestos and lead and mercury, and there was fuel storage tanks. So think of this facility that had really kind of everything. It had a little bit of industrial, a little bit of manufacturing, a little bit of office space, a little bit of warehouse space. So it had like a lot of different sectors or compartmentalized kind of functions within a building. It wasn't just an office building, for example, which in the DSS world, really kind of, you're looking for everything at that point. And you're always looking for everything anyways, but those are the case studies here. So we have this this slide. This is called risk management, mitigating risk. Really, I guess is the best. What's the risk tolerance is another good kind of slogan or tagline here, which is we want to kind of know the location where the DSS, the designated substances, are located. And there's no flow chart here. We kind of debated on using arrows and whatnot, but really any one of these three can apply when you're talking about risk management on a construction project, and that is knowing the location. So that is a key factor when you're talking about designated substances. Just because we have designated substances that are present on our site, they may not impact our scope of work, our project-specific scope of work. So we want to know where those DSSs are located. So when we get a scope of work from our client that says we want to renovate the corridors, and I keep using that as an example, we want to renovate classroom 101. We will target our survey to room 101. And then we'll ask other questions that, well, what about the wiring and the conduits? Are those being run through the corridor? Are they, is there any adjacent walls happening? So although it's renovation to classroom 101, there could be general vicinity interactions there as well. So we want to be sure that we're kind of getting all the locations so we know where these DSSs are located. Now, just because they're there, again, I come back to this again because we want to maintain these in a sense that if they're in good condition, they don't pose any health and safety to the facility or to the workers or to the occupants per that scope of work. Well, they just maintain them in good condition. So usually it's, I guess we're talking about asbestos here as well. But typically we want to maintain those in good condition regardless. That happens through good ongoing management of asbestos in buildings, for example. Loose flaking paint, lead paint is a DSS. So is it loose? Is it flaking? Are we sending workers into a workplace that potentially has steel drums that nobody knows what's inside of them? We all have those mystery drums. I'm talking steel gallon drums and no labels. What's inside of those? So we come across things like that where we have qualified contractors that can kind of investigate those or just remove them offsite and dispose of them. But it goes beyond. We're even seeing like things like radioactive smoke detectors or heat detectors. Whereas 15, 20 years ago, it's one of those things that we're now more cognizant of looking out for those low radiation devices where like, well, do we just throw them in the garbage or do we dispose of them properly? And it's like the evolution of things. And hopefully I don't cause any confusion there, but really we want to make sure that we're not disturbing things. We're taking precautions to protect or remove designated substances prior to renovation or construction work. That is the goal there too, is that we're aware of it. We either abate it, the health and safety, for the health and safety folks out there too, it's, the best approach is to remove the hazard, right? To abate the hazard and not have to worry about it. And then we talk about, if we can't abate it, then we make sure it's in good condition, there's no disturbance to it. And then we say the last line of defense there is really personal protective equipment to enter in that kind of work area. In this case, risk management, we want to talk about taking those precautions to protect or remove designated substances prior to renovation, construction renovation, which we can encompass into the DSS project. So we have a few more minutes here, a little bit. The summary here, I think there's only a few more slides here, but this one here is really kind of what Mark Lay started off with, which is really kind of think about your organization and what systems does your organization have in place to ensure DSS compliance. I love using examples and I have examples of project managers that I work with, and it could be a senior project manager that's done thousands of projects and understands that really the first step there is to call the consultant. Hey, need a proposal. We're thinking about, we have a capital budget here. We want to kind of run through some and let me use an example. Multi-res, they'll have a budget to do work in buildings, and they'll say we have a budget of X amount of dollars. Where can we most utilize this dollar amount most cost effectively. So why not call the consultant and say, do a DSS of this building, this building, this building, of these areas. And then we send in the report and they look at it and they say, yeah, we can do, we have this budget. If we avoid those two buildings, we can probably do more within these other buildings. So it allows those teams to allocate work and allocate their funds to complete that work, maybe more cost effectively versus, you know, hey, we have a budget, let's go do this project in this building. We do the DSS, and it turns out that everything is going to be $1 million for abatement work. And I don't want to shock anybody, like, well, $1 million, what's up with that? You know, so there's different projects that we can't get away from. So, like, you know, a good example is those window replacement projects. So if a window is failing, we're going to have water intrusion into the units, and, you know, that's not good. So, you know, sometimes if the texture finish is asbestos containing, we don't have a choice but to kind of, you know, do a type 2 enclosure inside of a unit to remove those windows. Can't get away from that, right? If it's asbestos, and we have to replace windows. So there's a kind of a partnering there for abatement work. But there's other, you know, getting back to this allocating funds, there's a really kind of a good option there to say, you know, here's a bulk of our work that we need to see happen. Where's the path of least resistance there is a good starting point. So what systems does your organization have in place to ensure DSS compliance? A junior project manager may kind of not understand that you know, hey, ECO, can you send me a proposal? Here's the scope of work that I need to get done. They might just kind of go right into getting quotes from other contractors that are going to do the work, do the renovation work. And then we come in after the fact, oh, you know, there's drywall joint compound in the walls. So now you know, if you want to remove those walls, there's an abatement project happening here, type 1, you know, type 2 sort of thing. So doing it, you know, your organization has these things in place. We're really kind of almost like the first step in a lot of ways too. So I think keep that in mind, in a sense that we can really strengthen the dollar amount on your projects and assist kind of with your decision making as well. So I'll get back to the slide here a little bit. Benefits to completing DSS: proceeding with your project without worry. So that's a benefit, knowing that you have complied with all applicable laws and regulations. You won't be concerned about having your job shut down because you've got the workplace health and safety aspects covered. So you're really kind of doing the DSS, you're getting that check mark off the to-do list on a project, and then you're kind of able to kind of you know, pass that heavy lifting off to the consultant as well too, with ensuring that if there are recommendations for doing stuff after the DSS, that they can be done and your organization is complying with applicable laws and regulations. You know, avoiding job shutdown cost incurring from that. I talked about brand management there a little bit as well, doing the right thing, abating if necessary, if we absolutely have to as well. And I think so. Yeah, if you have any questions about specific renovation or demolition projects, you can always contact us to discuss those particular assessments and testing needs. That is always the case. I'm a little short. I have about 9 minutes left here, but that's fine. How can ECO help? And this is really the final slide, in a sense that, you know, we thrive on these partnerships. We want to see your project succeed, and by that happening, we can kind of streamline things as well too. So it's more efficient with, hey, ECO, we need a quote, we need a proposal, here's the scope of work. We're able to kind of, you know, fire over a proposal. We understand your needs, and then you understand a little bit about how we would like to do our work a little bit, representative sampling, access. You know, I find we're fairly, you know, we're easy to work with. I think we can adapt as well to being available, taking those phone calls, voice calls, Teams. And I do have a list here as well that I want to just kind of end on, which is we can help with DSS, pre-renovation, pre-demolition surveys, investigate employee and tenant concerns. So that's something that we can investigate employee and tenant concerns. provide scope of work and abatement specifications. Site meetings with project owners, contractors, regulatory agencies. Happy to kind of hit the site and kind of look at things and provide meaningful feedback there as well. Provide training to staff. So this is just a webinar. It's not necessarily training per se, but we're happy to always provide training to our clients. A lot of valuable instances there as well. Providing management plans and assist with record keeping. So that's another aspect there with, good record keeping and good documentation retention. A good organization there is, has a good storage of these documents, which could come in handy later down the road. We talked about that earlier in the webinar as well. Retention of these documents can be helpful. So we're not repeating sampling programs over and over and over again. Sometimes you have to do some sampling, really, to be honest. I think it's one of those things that you want to have a report specifically for DSS that is project specific for that project, which most of the time takes some sampling to kind of get to that point where it's project specific, or even if it's just sampling that's kind of confirming or denying previous results, things like that. And I'm going to take a drink, and I think that's all I have. We're coming up, Chanel, to about 5 to 12. What about these questions?
Okay, so I currently have 2 questions sitting in our question and answer section. If you do have any further questions, please be sure to send one in there or into the chat box, and we'll start reading through them now. So the first question we have is, are you required to complete a DSS in a facility that is newer, for example, like 2010 or newer than that,
Excellent.
Before starting a renovation project?
Yeah, perfect question. So I always think about these questions in a sense where, I'll use the word of asbestos, right? Asbestos is probably the most common thing that we look for in a DSS, as I mentioned earlier. We always have these things about dates. Friable asbestos in Canada was banned in the late 70s. And most folks don't realize that non-friable asbestos was really just banned in 2019. So what does that mean? Well, we could have a facility that was built in, 2019 or 2018 that could have non-friable asbestos in there. And that's really just one of the 11 DSSs. Lead paint, for example, that could really be in really anything. Lead, mercury can really be in any kind of old thermostatic control. So these dates are a little bit kind of they're good in a sense where you can kind of almost budget to a sense. Like if I have a building that is somebody saying, hey, it's built in 2010, I know that the sampling there isn't as rigorous as it would be with a building that was in the 60s or 70s or 80s or whatever, right? So I think from a budgeting perspective, it's less, but yes, a DSS was required. That's the requirement. MOL gets on site. They don't care about the age of the building. They're there to protect the workers from those hazards, right? They're there to say, we're here on behalf of the workers. Where is this project specific DSS? They're not caring about when your building was built or whatnot. That's a harsh reality. Sorry, a DSS is required for every age of building.
Okay. And then the next question we have is, the landlord responsible for completing the DSS, not the tenant, or is it the other way around?
It's actually building owners have the responsibility. So under the act, it's the building owner that has the responsibility, and that responsibility is kind of a funny thing in the sense that we don't expect the building owner to do the DSS, right? I think as per the Occupational Health and Safety Act, it's the building's owner, it's their responsibility to ensure workers on their property that they own are protected. That on a construction project, the way it really kind of works in reality is the project owner or the general contractor is responsible for that DSS, right? So the owner hires that entity to do a project. They have the ultimate responsibility. So the ownership of that building has the ultimate responsibility, but that is typically most commonly completed by the project manager, or at least ensuring that it's one of those checked off the list items. And then of course, if the project manager doesn't do it, then the question is, well, who does it? Who's responsible for that DSS? Really, who's there to protect those workers? And there's layers of responsibility there, right? It's almost like if the owner doesn't do it, does the project manager do it? If the project manager isn't doing it, or the asset team isn't doing it, or capital team isn't doing it, then what about the general contractor whose workers is retained by that company, if that makes sense. So there's different layers there of responsibility. Ultimately, it comes to, in a most common world, it's the project manager that ensures that that DSS is completed for their project.
Cool. We are running really low on time. So if I do not get to your question, Steve, on your next slide, it does have all of his contact information. So if you do want to get in touch with Steve, here's how you would do it. But I do have two more, so let's see if we can get through them. So I have one that says, what inspections are recommended? A couple more. What inspections are recommended during remediation, and what documentation is required on completion of the work?
Amazing. I would say the best answer there is it's representative of what's happening with the work itself. Those are the abatement work. It's not a perfect science. It's not every day. It's full time, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We're malleable. I think it really comes into demonstrating good due diligence, representative inspections. Some would be maybe once a week. Some would maybe be once a day. Some are, it kind of depends on what's the area, what's the location, what's the occupancy, what's the facility, what's the owner's expectations of that project. I would say it varies depending on the project of the abatement work or whatever the oversight is needed there. They can vary. That's a good ongoing discussion that a project managers can have as well.
Awesome. Next question. How do you determine how many representative samples you need to submit for analysis?
The minimum requirement. So again, the best example there is probably the asbestos regulation. So table 1 of 27805, it talks about the minimum number of samples to be collected representatively depending on the material, depending on the square footage. So I think, as always, we want to make sure that we're meeting that minimum requirement. But there could be other examples where we take more samples to mitigate any future abatement that's required on that project. So if we are doing an office renovation project and drywall is being removed, maybe we're not taking just 7 samples of drywall for greater than 450 square meters. Maybe we're taking a little bit more to avoid any kind of abatement work that might be needed. So we get all negative results as a good example. I think the representative sampling approach, I would say, is asbestos would be easiest. Table 1, that's the minimum requirement. With lead based paints, that's the most common sampling happening during a DSS. Really what your scope of work involves with, doors and fixtures, and, we can representatively take a handful of samples, most commonly, of those surfaces.
Awesome. And then the last question I have here in the Q&A is, what jurisdiction is there for exterior DSS?
It's the same as interior. So the DSS, it doesn't change between functions of exterior, interior. It's all the same requirement on a project. It's, I'll use an example of a parking lot renewal project. Hey, there's no asbestos and there's no anything here. It's just a parking lot. Well, some of the paints might be lead containing. So some of those yellow, whenever you see a construction yellow paint, that's automatically probably assumed to be lead containing or lead based, sorry. So that's an example of an area where it's outside, it's a parking lot, what's up, not a lot going on here, but the component there could be lead in that yellow paint, right? It's kind of one of those, really anything everywhere should have a DSS. That's the requirement. Interior, exterior projects. Awesome.
And with that, that's the end of our question period. If you did have any further questions for Steve, his contact information is on the slide, so you can reach out to him by email or by phone, or again, through the Echo Learning email. We'll be able to get in touch with you that way as well. Otherwise, that's the end of our presentation, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.